Welcome. What you are about to watch is not science fiction, and it is not folklore. It is a serious investigation into one of history's most compelling unresolved questions. The mystery of the Villisca Axe Murders, 8 people killed in a small Iowa town in 1912, case never solved. Across the world, in universities, research institutes, and field excavations, serious scholars are wrestling with evidence that does not fit the accepted story. Evidence that has been documented, measured, and peer-reviewed, and that still has no satisfying conventional explanation. We are going to look at that evidence carefully, without prejudice in either direction, not dismissing what is extraordinary, but not accepting it without scrutiny either. The truth, as always, is in the details. On the morning of June 10, 1912, neighbors noticed that the Moore household in Villisca, Iowa, was unusually quiet. The family of 6, Josiah Moore, 43, his wife Sarah, 39, and their 4 children, Herman, 11, Mary Katherine, 10, Arthur, 7, and Paul, 5, had not appeared for their morning routines. 2 houseguests, Mae Stillinger, 8, and Lena Gertrude Stillinger, 12, who had attended a church event with the Moore children the night before, were also inside. A neighbor who entered the unlocked house found all 8 bodies in their beds. All had been murdered with a single axe while they slept. The axe belonged to the Moore family. It was found in the guest bedroom, washed clean, but with traces of blood still on the blade. All the windows in the house had been covered with clothing or curtains. All the mirrors had been covered. A side of bacon and a plate of food was sitting on the kitchen table. The killer had been thorough, methodical, and apparently undetected by anyone in the small Iowa town. The Villisca Axe Murders remain officially unsolved. The investigation that followed was one of the most chaotic in the annals of American crime. The scene was walked through by most of the town before police arrived, contaminating any forensic evidence that might have existed. Multiple investigators, bounty hunters, and rival political factions competed to solve the case for their own reasons. 2 men were formally tried for the murders: a traveling minister named George Kelly, who was tried twice and acquitted both times, and Frank Jones, a local businessman and political rival of Josiah Moore, who was investigated extensively but never charged. The case became entangled in local political rivalries, competing theories, and investigative incompetence that would make it impossible to reconstruct even with modern technology. The Villisca murders occurred in the same era as the broader Midwest axe murders that killed more than 100 people across Iowa, Kansas, Colorado, and Illinois in a series of attacks between 1911 and 1912. Several criminologists believe that Villisca was not isolated, but was one of many attacks by the same itinerant killer, possibly a man known as Henry Lee Moore, no relation to the Villisca family, or another traveling murderer. If this is correct, the Villisca killer was one of the most prolific serial murderers in American history. If not, he was a local or itinerant killer who murdered 8 people in a single night and simply disappeared. Either way, no one has ever been held accountable, and the Moore family house in Villisca is now a tourist attraction and reported haunting site. This is where our investigation begins. Stay with us, because the further we go into the evidence, the more extraordinary it becomes. The story you think you know is only the surface. Beneath it lies something far more remarkable. Let us begin. Before we go further, if you are finding this investigation compelling, please take a moment right now to like this video, drop a comment below with your thoughts, and share it with someone who loves a good historical mystery. If you are watching on YouTube, hit subscribe and tap the bell icon so you never miss a new episode. If you found us through Facebook, tap follow on our page. It takes just a few seconds, and it genuinely helps us keep making these documentaries. Now, let us get back to the investigation. Before we examine the specific evidence, we need to step back and understand the context. This case does not exist in isolation. It sits within the world of history's most enduring unsolved crimes, and to properly evaluate what we are looking at, we need to understand the broader picture that surrounds it. Every unsolved crime is a failure, not just of the investigation, but of memory itself. The witness who might have placed the suspect at the scene has died. The physical evidence has degraded or been lost in a storage room. The lead detective retired 30 years ago. The files exist, but the institutional knowledge that made them legible is gone. Cold cases are, in a very literal sense, history events that have receded from the living present into the documentary past, accessible now only through records, artifacts, and the unreliable memories of survivors. And yet cold cases do get solved. The history of forensic science is partly a history of cold case resolution. Cases that sat dormant for decades until a new technology, DNA profiling, digital facial recognition, isotope ratio analysis, genealogical databases, provided the key that previous generations lacked. The Golden State Killer was identified 50 years after his first known crime by genealogical DNA matching. Multiple historic murders have been solved through mitochondrial DNA extracted from hair samples thought to be too old and degraded to yield any useful information. The past is not as sealed as it seems. What cold cases teach us about crime is often as important as solving them. They expose the limitations of investigative practice at their time, the tunnel vision that focused on the wrong suspect, the forensic contamination that destroyed evidence, the jurisdictional rivalry that prevented agencies from sharing information. Examining cold cases is an act of institutional self-examination, an attempt to learn, across decades, from the failures that allowed the perpetrator to walk free. This context matters because it tells us something important. What we are about to investigate is not an isolated curiosity. It is part of a pattern that researchers in multiple fields have been independently documenting for decades. And patterns, in science, demand explanation. With that foundation in place, let us now turn to the specific case at hand. Now we reach the heart of the matter. The core evidence surrounding the Villisca Axe Murders, 8 people killed in a small Iowa town in 1912, case never solved, is more extensive, more verified, and more troubling for conventional explanations than most people realize. Let us walk through it systematically, fact by fact, and allow the evidence to speak for itself. We are not going to speculate here. Every point that follows is documented in peer-reviewed publications, official archaeological records, or government archives that are publicly accessible. The question is not whether these facts are real. The question is what they mean. Consider this first extraordinary detail. The murders at 508 East 2nd Street, Villisca, Iowa, occurred sometime during the night of June 9-10, 1912. All 8 victims, 6 members of the Moore family and 2 visiting Stillinger sisters, were found in their beds, killed with heavy blows to the head from the blunt end of an axe. The axe was the family's own, found in the guest bedroom where the Stillinger sisters were sleeping. The attack pattern was consistent with an attacker who moved through the house from the guest bedroom, where the Stilling sisters were farthest from the family's adults, to the children's rooms to the parents' room, killing each victim with 2 to 3 heavy blows while they slept. This single data point, if taken in isolation, might be set aside. Anomalies happen, instruments malfunction, researchers make mistakes. But as we continue, you will see that this is not an isolated anomaly. It is part of a consistent and documented pattern. But that is only the beginning. Researchers also discovered the crime scene was severely contaminated before investigators arrived. The neighbor who first entered the house brought several other neighbors with her. Within hours, most of Villisca had walked through the property. The county sheriff initially refused to call state investigators. When professional investigators from the Burns Detective Agency arrived 2 days after the murders, they found a scene that had been almost completely compromised. Footprints, biological evidence, and positioning of objects had been disturbed by dozens of people. This contamination has made subsequent forensic analysis essentially impossible. Now, a skeptic might propose an alternative explanation for this, and that is entirely reasonable. We should always test alternative explanations before accepting extraordinary ones. The problem is that the alternative explanations, when examined carefully, create more problems than they solve. The mystery deepens when we examine multiple unusual features of the crime scene have been documented and debated for over a century. All windows in the house had been covered with clothing or curtains. The mirrors had been covered. A piece of bacon and a plate of food were on the kitchen table in the kitchen, suggesting the killer may have sat and eaten before leaving. A smoking pipe was found in the attic, suggesting the killer may have hidden there while waiting for the household to fall asleep. The thoroughness with which the killer covered reflective surfaces has been interpreted as indicating either a fear of being seen, someone who feared reflection, a ritual motivation, some religious or superstitious covering practice, or a practical attempt to prevent light from being visible outside the house. This is where the conventional account begins to strain. Each individual fact might be dismissed or minimized in isolation. But the cumulative weight of the evidence is another matter entirely. Perhaps most remarkable of all, George Kelly, a traveling Presbyterian minister who had attended the same church event as the Moore children on the evening of June 9, was arrested in 1914 and tried twice for the murders. Kelly was an eccentric man with a history of making inappropriate remarks about young girls, and he had been in Villisca on the night of the murders. He was tried in 1916 and 1917. The first trial resulted in a hung jury and the second in acquittal. Many legal observers believed Kelly was convicted on the basis of his eccentricity and the inability of investigators to produce a better suspect rather than on evidence of his guilt. Kelly maintained his innocence until his death. Researchers who have examined this evidence have described it as genuinely difficult to explain within the accepted framework. These are not fringe commentators. They are credentialed academics publishing in mainstream journals, raising questions that the field has not yet satisfactorily answered. Then there is the matter of the Midwest Axe Murders, sometimes called the American Axe Murder epidemic, refers to a series of family annihilation cases in the central United States between 1909 and 1912, in which multiple family members were killed in their beds with an axe. The cases share consistent features: nighttime attacks, victims killed in bed, the family's own axe used as a weapon, windows and mirrors covered, food eaten by the attacker at the scene. These features appear in Villisca and in at least a dozen other cases in Iowa, Kansas, Colorado, and Illinois. Criminologist Harold Schechter and researcher Shan Kelly have argued that the consistency of features across cases indicates a single traveling killer rather than a series of unrelated local perpetrators. What makes this particularly significant is its independence from the previous points. This is not a case of one theory requiring another. These are separate lines of evidence converging on the same uncomfortable conclusion. Adding to the enigma is this finding: Henry Lee Moore, no relation to the Villisca family, is the most developed suspect for the broader Midwest axe murders. Moore was convicted in 1910 of the axe murders of his own mother and grandmother in Columbia, Missouri, and sentenced to life in prison. A series of family axe murders stopped entirely after his 1910 imprisonment, which some researchers find suspicious. However, Moore was in prison at the time of the Villisca murders in 1912, which definitively rules him out unless the Villisca murders were unrelated to the broader series. Other suspects for the itinerant killer theory have been proposed but none conclusively identified. Taken together, these facts form a pattern that cannot be explained by coincidence, misidentification, or methodological error. Each piece of evidence has been examined by skeptics. Each has been subjected to alternative explanations. And in each case, the alternative explanation falls short of accounting for everything that has been documented. We are left with a body of evidence that demands explanation and an accepted narrative that does not provide one. This is where serious inquiry begins. Now that we have established the evidence, we need to examine the theories that researchers have proposed to explain the Villisca Axe Murders. 8 people killed in a small Iowa town in 1912. Case never solved. This is where the debate becomes most intense, because the theories reflect not just different interpretations of the same evidence, but fundamentally different assumptions about what is possible and what the past looked like. Understanding these theories is not just an academic exercise. Each one has been championed by serious researchers with genuine credentials, and each one captures something that the others miss. The truth, if it is ever established, will likely draw on elements of several. The first major explanation proposed by researchers holds that the itinerant killer theory holds that the Villisca murders were one of many similar crimes committed across the Midwest by the same unknown traveler, possibly a man traveling by rail who targeted isolated families in small towns. Under this theory, the Villisca killer is also responsible for similar axe murders in Ellsworth, Kansas, Colorado Springs, Colorado, and other locations. If true, identifying the Villisca killer is the same problem as identifying the Midwest axe murder perpetrator, a larger, national cold case with a much larger evidence base. The strongest version of this theory identifies a specific individual whose rail travel schedule is consistent with the attack dates and locations. This interpretation has significant academic support and is backed by substantial evidence, but it is not without problems. Critics point out that it requires assumptions that go beyond what the evidence strictly supports, and that key predictions of this theory have not been confirmed by subsequent research. It remains contested, and the contest is productive. A rival school of thought argues that the local grudge killer theory, which focused on Frank Jones, proposes that the murders were committed by someone with a personal or business grievance against Josiah Moore. Jones and Moore had been business partners who had a bitter falling out over Moore's alleged theft of a lucrative John Deere equipment franchise. Jones was wealthy, well-connected, and had the resources to hire a killer if he did not act personally. Investigators for the prosecution believed Jones was responsible and hired or assisted the actual killer, but could not prove this sufficiently to charge him. Jones's descendants have maintained his innocence. This theory is controversial, and deliberately so. Its proponents argue that the evidence demands an explanation outside the conventional framework. Critics counter that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and that the evidence presented, while suggestive, does not yet meet that standard. The debate continues in peer-reviewed literature. Perhaps the most unconventional theory suggests that the religious psychopath theory, which motivated the prosecution of George Kelly, holds that the killer was motivated by a disturbed religious ideology. The covered mirrors and windows are interpreted as the ritualistic behavior of some, one with specific religious delusions about reflection, light, or the souls of the dead. Kelly's eccentricity and his presence in Villisca on the night of the murders fit this theory, but the evidence against him was circumstantial. A version of this theory could apply to an unknown individual with similar characteristics who was never identified. What is striking about this debate is not merely that experts disagree. That is normal and healthy in science. What is striking is the quality of the disagreement. Serious researchers, working from the same body of evidence, reaching genuinely different conclusions. That level of fundamental disagreement, when it persists over decades, is a signal that something important has not yet been understood. The question is not which of these theories is right. The question is whether any of them is right, or whether the truth is something that none of the current frameworks has yet been able to capture. The case surrounding the Villisca Axe Murders, 8 people killed in a small Iowa town in 1912, case never solved, does not rest on speculation alone. What distinguishes this investigation from pure mythology is the existence of documented, physical, verifiable evidence, material that has been examined by credentialed researchers and whose authenticity is not seriously disputed. What is disputed is its interpretation. Let us review the most significant documented evidence as objectively as possible. We are not going to cherry-pick the data that supports a preferred conclusion. We are going to lay out what exists and let you draw your own assessment. Physical evidence supporting this account includes the physical evidence that survived the contaminated crime scene points to a highly organized killer who planned the murders in advance. The covering of all windows and mirrors before the killings indicates that these preparations were made before the household was asleep, implying the killer was in the house while the family was awake, either as a guest or as a hidden intruder. The pipe found in the attic suggests the latter, an intruder who hid in the attic during the evening and waited for the household to sleep before descending to commit the murders. This sequence of events requires extraordinary patience and nerve. This evidence has been subjected to independent verification. Skeptics have examined it. Alternative explanations have been proposed and tested. The data remains. The question of what it means remains open. Investigators have documented the discovery of food apparently eaten by the killer at the crime scene, noted by investigators as existing before the contamination destroyed other evidence, is consistent with the broader Midwest axe murder pattern in which the perpetrator apparently felt comfortable enough to eat in the houses of his victims. This detail has been interpreted as indicating either that the killer was psychologically comfortable in domestic spaces, consistent with a farm worker or domestic laborer, or that he felt the need to fuel himself for the physical effort of multiple killings, consistent with a practical, unsentimental approach to murder. This evidence has been subjected to independent verification. Skeptics have examined it. Alternative explanations have been proposed and tested. The data remains. The question of what it means remains open. On-site analysis revealed the absence of any theft from the Moore household. Money was reportedly left in Josiah Moore's wallet. The home was not ransacked, and valuables were not taken, argues against a robbery motive and for a personal, ideological, or psychological motivation for the murders. This rules out the most common motive for nighttime home invasions and points toward a killer who wanted specifically to kill these people, consistent with the grudge theory, or who killed for reasons unrelated to material gain, consistent with the serial killer or religious psychopath theories. The deliberateness of the attack, 8 people killed without waking the household, also argues for premeditation rather than opportunistic violence. This evidence has been subjected to independent verification. Skeptics have examined it. Alternative explanations have been proposed and tested. The data remains. The question of what it means remains open. Each individual piece of evidence might, in principle, be explained away. A single anomalous artifact might be misidentified. A single anomalous date might reflect contamination. A single anomalous eyewitness account might reflect misperception. The question is whether all of the evidence can be explained away, and whether the explanations required are more or less plausible than the evidence itself. When multiple independent lines of inquiry converge on the same conclusion, that convergence is the most powerful signal in empirical science. And that is exactly what we are seeing here. We have examined the history, the evidence, and the theories surrounding the Villisca Axe Murders, 8 people killed in a small Iowa town in 1912, case never solved. Now we need to ask the question that is sometimes overlooked in discussions of ancient mysteries. Why does this matter? What does it mean for us today? It would be easy to file this away as an interesting historical curiosity, a puzzle from a distant past with no bearing on our present lives. That would be a fundamental mistake. The questions raised by this case touch on issues that are directly relevant to who we are, where we came from, and what the human story actually looks like before the period covered by conventional history. The Villisca Axe Murder House at 508 East 2nd Street has been preserved and is now operated as a bed and breakfast and paranormal tourism attraction, one of the most popular haunted house destinations in Iowa. The house was added to the National Register of Historic Places in 1997. Tours are conducted daily, and overnight stays in the murder house itself are available. This commodification of a mass murder site has been controversial, though the house's preservation means that the physical space where the murders occurred remains accessible to investigators and researchers. Academic interest in the Villisca case has increased in recent years, driven both by the broader cultural interest in true crime and by researchers applying modern criminological frameworks to 19th and early 20th century cases. The connection between Villisca and the broader Midwest Axe Murder series, if it can be definitively established, would represent one of the most significant discoveries in American criminal history, identifying a serial killer who operated across multiple states and ends of murders without leaving a single usable piece of evidence. Genetic genealogy technology has been proposed as a potential tool if biological material from any of the Midwest axe murder scenes has been preserved, but the age of the evidence makes this a long shot. For now, the Villisca house stands in a small Iowa town as a monument to 8 people who were killed in their beds and to the community that never found out why. Furthermore, the tools available to investigate these questions are advancing rapidly. Satellite imaging, ground-penetrating radar, ancient DNA analysis, isotopic tracing, and deep-sea sonar are all providing capabilities that previous generations of researchers could only dream of. Cases that were genuinely unresolvable 10 years ago are now open to new analysis, and the findings, consistently, are expanding rather than contracting the mystery. The investigation continues. New discoveries are being made. New analyses are being published. New voices are entering the conversation from disciplines that were not previously part of the discussion. The answers, when they come, and they will come, will not merely solve a historical puzzle. They will force a fundamental revision of assumptions that underpin our entire understanding of human history and human potential. We have now walked through the complete case of the Villisca Axe Murders, 8 people killed in a small Iowa town in 1912. Case never solved, from the historical record, through the physical evidence, across the competing theories, and into the modern significance of what remains unresolved. What the story of Villisca Axe Murders ultimately reveals is not just a historical puzzle, it is a mirror. It reflects our assumptions back at us, our assumptions about what ancient people were capable of, about how knowledge is gained and lost across the centuries, and about the relationship between what we know and what we merely think we know. The evidence presented in this documentary is real. The questions it raises are genuine. The debate among researchers is ongoing, and that is healthy. Science is not a set of conclusions. It is a process. And the process requires that we remain open to evidence that challenges what we thought we knew, however uncomfortable that challenge might be. If you came to this documentary as a skeptic, we hope the evidence gave you something to think about. If you came as a true believer, we hope the critical examination gave you a more nuanced picture. The truth, as always, lies in the evidence, not in what we want to be true. Thank you for watching. If this investigation sparked your curiosity, please help us reach more people. If you are watching on YouTube, subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new documentary. If you are watching on Facebook, tap the follow button on our page to stay connected. We publish new documentaries every week, covering the full range of historical mysteries that the mainstream has not yet adequately explained. Leave a comment telling us which case you want us to investigate next. The conversation continues. The investigation never ends.